All right, welcome everybody to Future Ready Data Engineering, Essential Strategies for the AI Era. We are so glad that you are here with us today. We have a really great conversation that we're going to have with two experts in this field. We know that many of you are facing the future of data engineering with a lot of questions. What does it mean to be AI ready? Um, what does the future of data engineering look like? And we're really excited to hear from our speakers this morning, their insights and how to prepare for the future. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. We will have some time at the end for Q&A. So if you would like to submit any questions for our two speakers, you can do so at the Q&A tab or in the chat, and we will try to answer as many of those questions towards the end of this discussion as possible. But without any further ado, I'm going to introduce today's speaker. Our first speaker is Bill Hostmann, who is VP and Research Fellow with Dresner Advisory Services. His areas of focus include analytic data infrastructure and advanced analytics applications. Bill has had more than 20 years of product management experience at the intersection of business intelligence and data infrastructure, and he spent 14 years as a research analyst at Gartner, including several years as VP and distinguished analyst for BI and analytics. We're really grateful to have you here, Bill. Welcome. And our second speaker is Sean Knapp. Sean is the founder and CEO of Ascend. Previously, he was co-founder and CTO at Uyala, where he led product and engineering. And before that, he was tech lead at Google, working on some of the most complex and interesting data there. So welcome, Sean. I'll let you say a quick hello.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. Bill, really excited to do this conversation with you. So let's get started.
Great.
Yeah, so we're going to do kind of a panel discussion, but because we have Bill here who has done so much phenomenal research, we really wanted to ground this in some of the findings that you and your team, Bill, have come up with over the course of your research for the past year. And so we're going to start. Sean and I will go off camera and we'll let you kind of share what are your findings, what are you seeing across data teams as you look at the current reality and the future of data engineering. So without any further ado, I'll go ahead and click and you can go.
Super. Thank you. Thanks, Jenny. So if we can click to the next slide, I just want to do a quick introduction onto Dresner Advisory. I mean, we're focused primarily on business intelligence and analytics and the related technologies and products and the success of data and analytic leaders. So we really try and figure out, what makes a successful leader, what makes data successful inside an organization, and also the flip side of that, what makes it unsuccessful inside an organization. We do primary research based on, surveys and market data, and then we publish that out, and we work a lot with data and analytics leaders as our clients as well. So we have both the quantitative as well as qualitative perspective in our research. I think one of the most startling findings for me in all of the research, and in fact, in all of my time I've been spending in terms of data and analytics, is, if we could flip to the next slide, Jenny, is that today's data, we have huge data gaps. I mean, it is a jumble of collections of data sources, data targets, spreadsheets. It's still, no matter how much we've invested, it's still a mess. And I call it the data gap. And it's really big because when we start to look at the gap between operational data and analytic data. And for me, the most startling finding of our research is that more than 50% of the analytics consumers say that they can't access the data in the quality they need without difficulty, or it's just impossible to access. And what that tells me is that this jumble of data, this mess of data that we have, is costing our most important resources, the people who are consuming that data to make decisions. It's costing them a lot of time because they're spending close to 50% of their time looking for the information or wrangling it into a form that works for the decisions that they're trying to make. That's a very expensive cost. And I think we lose that when we start talking about technology and things like that. We forget that this has a real impact in terms of the business. Now, if we flip to the next slide, if we may, really what we want to do is we want to get the data to be much more rational, much more logical, much more integrated. That we've identified how to do the integration in an intelligent way, that there are different networks of information that really provide us with the combinations and the transformations that we need. And they're just like social data. They are, clusters of information that certain groups need to use. And this is not what we have today. What we have today is we still have that mess we talked about, and that's causing a lot of problems. So the future for data engineering is this idea of, a network of integrated data, and that there's intelligence associated with that data. We're going to drill into that a little bit more in this discussion here. If I can get you to flip to the next slide. This is sort of the benchmark. So all of that's great, but what does it take to get to be a successful organization in terms of integrated and intelligent business operations? And we have something called the hyper-decisive maturity model. And we've looked at organizations that are really, really extreme in their ability to be able to use information immediately to make decisions. And they've got some very important characteristics, and we're going to be able to go through these a little bit more. But the main thing is that the data engineering underpins all of these different areas and disciplines, and we have to incorporate that into the art and science of data engineering. We have to have transparency and accountability. We have to have the ability to do action on insight, closed loop workflows. We need to have relationships, agreements, and politics and conflict resolution. We need those information contracts so that we can provide that information democracy that we want to. We've got to have measured data quality and literacy. So it's not just the data quality, but it's also the literacy of the consumers. And there's a widespread sort of documentation and catalog and understanding of the data and its metadata and how to use it. And we need to be able to measure that. And we need to have trust in the data and its governance. We need to have information, and this is perhaps the most important item from that previous chart where we showed sort of networks of data, is information aligns with the business objectives. And in fact, this is probably the most highly correlated measure that we look at when we're talking about the success of BI and analytics is when we look at all the other things that go on when we ask the question, how well does your information align with your business objectives? The folks that score very high on that also score very high on the success of their initiatives and their investments. So this is just a quick a snapshot of some of the things we're going to be talking about and how the role of data engineering fits. And how do you get to that level of high achievement so that we have that impact, we have that trust, we have the action on insight, and we have that elimination of that data gap that is costing us time and latency in the decisions that are critical to running our business. So if we can flip to the next slide, some other findings that are very important. 81% of our user survey respondents indicate that data engineering is a critical or very important aspect of their whole data infrastructure, as well as their business operations. However, what we also see is that 37% of our users, respondents, say that their data engineering approach is highly effective. So not only do we have a data gap, but we have the effectiveness gap as well of data engineering. And the last point I want to make is that the organizations that have a high focus and score data engineering as being critical or very important have a much higher return on those investments when we measure the success with BI. So that's a pretty important correlation, I think, between the two. So with that, I think we can go to the next slide and just talk about some of the survey results in terms of data engineering development and usability priorities. We still have folks still want to have a very simple to build and execute data workflows and scripts. And it's getting more and more complicated as we add more automation into it, as there are more and more governance issues and more regulatory and compliance issues, more sensitivity to personal priorities or personal information. We need to have easy to use tools that automate this stuff. And, there's been a very big code first approach, but I think there's a move and a desire to move more towards a no code approach. We need schedulers for coordinating it, and we need governance capabilities built in. Folks are putting a high priority on being able to debug, to test and tune the data. We need the connectors, these very, very low level things, but are absolutely critical in terms of the priorities that folks are looking for. And I think as we look forward in terms of data engineering, we're going to have to add things like statefulness as we start to move to more agentic AI being a part of data engineering. We're going to have to build those governance capabilities into those agentic workflows. We're going to have statefulness within that agentic workflow for data engineering. So it's a very exciting time. I've been studying this marketplace for a long, long time, and I'm really looking forward to having more discussions here on the future of data engineering.
Awesome. Thank you so, so much, Bill. I think that data really does ground us in a really meaningful reality for this conversation, right? We have so many people who, if over a little under a third of teams say, or over a third of teams say that their approach is highly effective, but that's almost 2/3 that are saying that they're not as effective as they could be. There's definite room for improvement. And so, Sean and Bill, I know you are both passionate about getting teams to be really effective and impactful with their work. But I think one of the things that we should talk about first is data quality. And so we do have a poll, and I think it's been open. And thank you for everyone who's filled it out. So we said, let me end this poll and we can share these results. 100% of people say that data quality is a challenge. So that seems very relevant to everyone. And then the second question, do you see data quality increasing or decreasing with the advent and introduction of AI-driven use cases? We're a little bit more split on this. And so I'd love to hear, maybe Bill, let's start with you.
Sure.
Let's talk about building trust within organizations, and can you talk about the challenge teams are facing when it comes to building trust, and what you see that looking like as these AI workloads get introduced?
Yeah, let me kind of make a first couple comment on the data quality survey, because thank you very much for everybody for putting the responses in there. The first question is almost a trick question. Is data quality a challenge within your organization? I used to have a little thing that was called the 5 fatal flaws of BI, and one of the first fatal flaws was believing that you didn't have a data quality problem. And so I'm glad everybody on the seminar here is we're in alignment. Everybody has a data quality problem. It changes from day to day. Anyway, I've only had one person raise their hand and say we don't have data quality problem. And everybody in the presentation turned around to look to see who it was, because it was such a sort of an incredible answer. But I think the other one is also a really interesting one, is that data quality increases as a result of AI-driven use cases. And a bunch of folks see it as decreasing. We should talk about that more and touch on that, Sean, as we get into our discussion a little bit more. I think one of the things in answer to this question about how do teams ensure data quality, observability, and governance is understanding the business impact of that data. And I think that's the first thing and I think it's those metrics like that 50% of the folks can't access the data. when you present that to a senior level manager and show that, yeah, we may be talking about, low level things here in terms of transformation, extractions, but the not doing this well or not being effective at being able to do it translates into a real business impact and a negative business impact. We're burning a lot of time. It's not accounted for time. It's just lost time. And so I think the ensuring starts by education and educating the folks on the impact. I think the other thing that I would throw in here is in terms of observability is having data quality metrics, and not just metrics from the perspective of we look at how many missing elements are there or how many dupes do we do or things like that, but rather from a user's perspective. And we have some metrics that ask questions about the timeliness, the relevance, the accuracy, the consistency, as well as their own knowledge about how to use it, how to use that information. I think that's important. That would be my starting point, because it's really got to be based on business-based outcomes as well as metrics, and I think that's how you start to move towards improving data quality. And then you start to put metrics in there, you start to improve the observability, and then the governance comes along as folks understand you have to have guardrails associated with this to make it work for the different audiences.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that as well. What we see is right now it does still feel a lot like the Wild West when it comes to data quality inside of a lot of organizations. And I really like what you said there, Bill, around making sure that first we create a lot of visibility and observability around it, and educating users on what data quality means and how we actually implement it. One of the things we still observe a lot in the market is people are running large, complex data systems where they're not actually validating a lot of what they are doing in code and the data that's flowing through. Maybe they're checking something way up at source, and maybe they're checking something way down at destination. But if we draw parallels to what we've seen in the software space, there's severe lack of unit testing and integration testing. And I think this is one of the things we see in the more modern era, is really that ability to actually better test data at every part of the life cycle around the expectations. And I think one of the cool parts tied to is data quality going to go up or down question, AI can actually help us with a lot of that too. AI can look at our code, and as we're doing data transformation logic, understand the assumptions that we're even making inside of that code, and help implement then the data quality checks that are implicit in the data transformation logic we're trying to put in place, and ensure that those are actually enforced and valid. So that's usually where we see most mistakes happen as data engineers or software engineers are implementing code, is there's just inherent assumptions being made that aren't actually valid and in line with the reality of the data that's flowing through the system.
Man, that is so true. I can't tell you the number of times I've had meetings with, high-level information managers, and just asking them about what the business metrics look like and what the impact is on their data infrastructure and their data operations, and how they get that wrong. They don't really have that connection. And so you can fix things down at a low level, but if it's not aligned with with where the business is going, you can be chasing a phantom shadow there. And I think it's a critical part of data engineers' responsibilities, is to know, to not make those assumptions, to not build in those assumptions into the workflow. They need to have it validated. And I think that's how you increase the effectiveness of data engineering, is it's more relevant to running that business. And
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think one of the things I've heard from both of you is, um, Bill, what I was hearing is there's kind of a softer skill that's not just the technical side with data quality. You have to be able to speak the language of the business. I think if we could pivot the conversation and talk kind of on the more technical side of that too, I think it kind of addresses a similar issue, is that data ops piece and the FinOps piece. Um, so I'd love to hear from you, Bill, about like data ops. How do you see it fitting into the strategy of um, data teams to become more effective? Obviously, you know, in the AI era.
Well, I'll tell you, data ops is important. You mentioned the second part, which is the FinOps part, and that's the thing that we're having a lot of conversations with clients about right now and data leaders is, um, how do I get some observability into the costs that I'm running into? And is this the right information? Are we storing the right information? Are we moving the right information around and getting a handle on that? And then tying that to the governance aspect of things. I mean, I think these things are all, the security, the privacy, the governance, the data ops, the financial operations are all very important. But I think more and more we're getting questions around the cost. And to your other point, the data engineering pipeline needs to feed information to us in terms of that cost. Where are we incurring the largest costs? Are we, in fact, providing the right information? Again, that's where those metrics come in. And I think the other thing is, so the cost is number one. The second thing is the data ops is, how do we automate this stuff? How do we make this stuff more intelligent unto its own so that when we have an upstream change in some business process, there's a ripple down effect to the source and target and the data engineering, the transformations that go along, and vice versa. When there's a change in the information sources, how do we ripple that up to the business consumption or the consumption side of things? And so how do we automate that? How do we make that more intelligent as opposed to us sitting around looking at some metadata repository and hoping we identify something? As we say, as we showed in those first couple slides, the data is all over the place, and it's extremely hard without having some sort of automation associated with our development operations, identify where those major changes have happened so that we can focus on the right things. And I think that's going to be the biggest sort of change going forward, is we're going to rethink the whole data operations pipeline, thinking about it as a more automated and a more intelligent pipeline going forward. And it's going to have cost management associated with that, in terms of measuring, helping us measure the value of both data engineering, but more importantly, the value of the data that's delivered to the consumer.
Yeah, Sean, I'd love to hear too like if you could describe the penultimate, like the best state of data ops. What is the ideal data ops state for teams in your
Yeah.
perspective too?
Oh man, yeah. So I'd love to do that, and I will preface it with it's changing too. In many ways, I'm finding in the last probably 6 months, as we at Ascend are spending a lot of time on the DevOps side. That's really influencing and building our product and doing a lot more agentic software engineering. That's informing a lot of the other side of the house, which is the agentic data engineering and data ops side. And so let me zoom out to the 100,000 foot view really fast, and then I think we can really tackle the question that you posed, Jenny. If I zoom out really far, as a recovering CTO and somebody who's run large software organizations in the past, I always embrace this premise of DevOps is all around how do you enable more people to write more software faster and safely. That's like the sort of going back to Bill's comment of business outcomes. That's really what the business wants. Let more people go really, really fast, do it safely, and you produce really good outcomes. And most of what you see tactically employed in the notion of DevOps is really to that end goal. And so when we zoom way out and we look at data ops, it's very similar, right? Which is how do I enable more people from broader parts of the business to do more things with data fast but safe? And I think the fast but safe is the part that oftentimes we lose sight of. We lose sight of the fast. We add in lots of governance and guardrails and things that slow things down. So it's safety through obfuscation or obstruction, as opposed to safety is for efficiency. Um, and so I think that's the same premise when we think about data ops itself. Tactically, what that looks like, highly parameterized environments, safe, bounded environments that let you go from a dev to stage to prod without stomping on production data in the wrong part, protecting data, whether it's PHI or PII. I think all of those things are really important to have the right process and frameworks in place to encourage those behaviors. Now, when I take what's really a much more modern lens, and I'm going to preface with this might start to sound a little bit more futuristic for folks on the data side, as data does tend to trail software. Data ops definitely has trailed DevOps by multiple years, but I think it's catching up. I will say on the software side, like the sort of golden standard, and certainly something we're actually aggressively working towards internally at Ascend, is like the ultimate outcome for DevOps is how do you have an environment that enables you to go so fast and so safely with tremendous amounts of tests, tremendous amounts of automation and auditability. You want that because you want to let an AI agent run free and let it do things with your code, test it, modify it, pop up a sandbox so you can actually test your outcome. And the more you can let that agent be sort of directed and informed by your engineers, but have it do the bidding of your engineers, the better off you are. But it needs to be a bounded, safe environment. And I will say in the software realm, right now, like this is the state of the art that we're seeing. And we're seeing whether it's OpenAI, Microsoft, GitHub, Anthropic, Google are all pushing huge amounts of weight behind this from a software perspective. Why I think that's so important is in the data realm, we haven't really solved for this agentic meets data ops space quite the same way yet, where we can let these agents run and actually do it safely. Obviously, this is an area that we care a lot about at Ascend, and we think we're really pushing the boundary on it. But if I ignore some of the Ascend Kool-Aid for a second and just talk more sort of philosophically and academic about this, that's really the ultimate goal is you want your data engineers to be able to use agents or cut loose themselves and just go to town on their data pipelines and their data systems and be able to make really fast changes, get really fast feedback on are those changes working or not, and do it in a really safe way where they don't break other systems.
Yeah, I think
Can I
that's,
toss,
oh, go
can
ahead, Bill.
I want to just add something there. I think it's really important too, as you're starting to modify your DevOps processes and workflows, is to benchmark your current state. In other words, ask, is the data, accurate enough, timely enough? Are you getting access to it? So that as you're making those improvements, you've got a baseline. Because I can't tell you the number of times I've had people ask me, well, how do we know if those investments in the data infrastructure, the data pipeline are paying off? Or did you benchmark the original state? No. Okay, so as we make those incremental improvements, as we start to automate, as we start to add intelligence into it, we're going to have no way of measuring it unless we baseline the current state. And so some of those metrics, like, how difficult is it for you to get at the information today? People are very kind in sharing their opinion about that. And so I think it's, and just having a set of metrics around timeliness, relevancy, and accuracy as a baseline, so that as you're making those investments in your DevOps, you can point back to and say, we have made these incremental improvements.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think it's a great segue to this topic about the future state of data engineering. I think
Hmm.
I've heard both of you talk about what this looks like. What does the future of data engineering look like, and how do teams prepare? So, Bill, I want to start off with you, and I think if it's okay with you, we can go right here because I think you set us off to talk about this right at the beginning of this. So I'll leave you with this slide, and you can kind of talk through what you think the future of data engineering looks like.
Okay, I will try and make it quick. Yeah, I think this is what data engineering and the role it has got to take going forward. I know that we think a lot of terms about sinks, sources and targets, and transformations, and aggregations, and deduping, and wrangling data, but we have to. And believe me, that's all extremely challenging to do. But we've got to start to think about these integration points, and how do we surface things like transparency? How do we make how do we make things like transparency easier for the average consumer? How do we start to tie it into actually pulling levers inside the organization? So in other words, this data is being consumed, it's being used by this process. Is there some way that we can actually then automate the pulling of the lever, as opposed to having somebody to get in there, having to do all this analysis? And I think that's what's going to happen, is the workflows that actually do the operations and the data engineering pipelines are going to be tightly coupled together and working together, so that we can actually have closed loop workflows between the data engineering workflow and the business operations workflows. There's going to be a tight coupling between those two things. I think this stuff is all, like you say, it's all technically very, very challenging. But what I have found is within organizations is the problems are usually within the white spaces on the org chart. In other words, data engineering is over here in one part of the organization, supply chains over there, finance is over there, and that's a lot of white space. And so, that means we have to define a currency for how we work together, an internal currency and a way of contracting, and being able to translate that down into the data engineering operation side of things. And the cost management side of things. And again, there's a benefit to that as well. And I think that's a part that's been overlooked. Again, it's a soft skill, but it's an absolutely. I'm an engineer by education and by work track record, but I have found the soft skills. These issues, that white space in the org chart, are the things that really get us. So I think in the future, we've got to be able to marry, how we work together as an organization across that white space into understanding its impact on the development operations and the data engineering pipelines, and really understand that internal currency about how we work together, how do we motivate folks, how do we reward folks. I can't, and I'm just kind of going through this thing. Is these next two are the data quality and literacy, and the trust in the data and its governance. Those two things have got to be just absolutely married together. And now one of the things that I will say that's interesting is, that there are organizations that I talk to, and they have like sort of the walled garden of their information. They have their sources, they have their targets, they have their data engineering pipelines. There's a tremendous amount of trust in data and in the governance of the data. Everybody likes their data governance programs. And yet they still have that access problem. They still have that latency of being able to get at the information, and they have to spend a lot of time doing the wrangling. So we need to be able to, these things have got to be tied together: the trust in the information, the alignment with the data quality, alignment with the business objectives, being able to then get that information to the data engineering pipeline so we can reduce that latency and that cost of getting access to that information. I think that's extremely important. The next step is probably in the future when we talk about data diversity. I mean, when we start talking about doing RAG and doing unstructured content and vector and feature analysis, we're going to have a lot more data diversity in that space. We need to do that. That's a part of that business, and those business data centers that we talked about at the very beginning. And so we're going to have to be able to support those in our data engineering workflows as well. It's not just transactional data anymore. And then I'm sure we can spend the whole rest of the webinar just talking about the automation, the intelligence embedding. We have to take these new techniques, and they're changing every day. They're changing every week. I mean, I do this stuff on a weekly basis, and I'm just always surprised about how advanced things are getting. And we got to pull these things down into our operations, our data operations, and incorporate them on a daily basis. Now, I don't know if we want to talk about it now, but we don't want to do this on a wholesale thing. We don't want to throw out our current stack and say, oh yeah, we're going to put a new stack in here. I think the future is going to be incremental. I think it's going to be experimental. I think there's a lot of areas where we have to do the validation, but at the same time, we have to do this, because if we don't, we're going to get left behind. Because I can tell you, everybody else in the industry is doing this. They're making these investments. They understand the importance of both data quality, data engineering, the role of AI. So if you're not doing it, I can promise you your competition probably is.
100%. What I'm hearing from you, Bill, is like our soft skills aren't going anywhere. We should probably still be working on those. But we have some new skills to learn too.
We got some new skills, and those are technical skills, but we can't forget the other soft skills. They're just, that's why we have that 37% are not being effective, is because we're maybe not focusing on the right, the right aspects of trust, data quality. And it's only going to get more complicated from both the data side, the data quality side, the types of data going forward. And so I think getting both the tie-in of the soft skills and the technology together is a lot, but it's going to be extremely important. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Go ahead, Sean.
I was just saying, we talked about the white space, right? And it so reminds me, we used to always talk about data silos. And really, the thing that's going to slow us down, no matter, you may have the perfect lake architecture or lake house architecture or mesh architecture and remove all those data silos, but if you still have people silos, and the people part in many ways is harder, that's that white space that you talk about. And that's where those soft skills really come in. And no matter how far we evolve technically, our architectures, we're always going to have the white space between orgs.
Yeah. I can't, and again, like I said, I've been in product management, technology, and when I look at the successful organizations, they've really tied together their technology stack with their business stack. They've done it both organizationally, they've done it language-wise, and they have well-defined metrics on how well they're doing in each one of those areas to measure and hold each other accountable. How well are you doing in terms of your literacy? How well are you, complying with our governance contracts? So there's a it's a two-way street in terms of benefits.
Sean, I'd love to hear too, kind of your vision for the future of data engineering. I know you spend a ton of time thinking about this. When you think about the future of data engineering, what does it look like for you, and how do you think teams prepare for that?
So I do think it's going to look very different, and in pretty short order. I think it will look very different within 6 months, 12 months, and on a pretty fast cadence. The reason why I think this is, obviously, I think AI and agentic data engineering are going to radically change the space. I think it is going to change slower than it will for software, for some. And so what I think that means is we're going to see a longer tail, which is probably going to create some more FOMO and missed opportunity for data teams that don't move as fast. And we're seeing software teams move amazingly fast. And even with some of the largest companies and enterprises, which historically have been pretty slow to move and adopt, they're even moving fast. On the software side, I think data just naturally tends to move slower because you have more safeguards, more protections in place. You have data gravity itself. Um, and so it's going to be this, I think, a tale of not even two cities, but really just like a much broader spectrum. Um, so let me define where I think the extreme end of the spectrum is, and sort of the innovative side. And I think we'll just see it kind of dragging others along on the way. Um, I do think we're going to see a future where data engineering is going to be very agentic in nature. I think we're going to see business users be able to articulate far more of what they want to achieve as outcomes, even in natural English languages. I think we're even to see data engineering teams, data scientists, machine learning experts, all using AI to construct much more complex data pipelines, which I think is also great. There's so much goodness in the world to be had and found around cancer research, genomics, healthcare, media, like all of the kind of classic uh, industries that we work with. You're going to see really innovate much faster when they can adopt more on the agentic side. And so I think we're going to see much, much faster adoption innovation. Um, what I think that
Hmm.
means for a lot of these teams, I think skill sets are going to evolve and mature much faster. I think we're going to see more democratization coming in. I think we're also going to see teams, frankly, get much stronger data quality, greater data observability at the same time, as the same things we need to make AI really effective are actually the things that our data teams themselves really benefit from. And so I think we're going to see a lot more teams invest in that, the observability stack, the data ops and the FinOps, as Bill was alluding to earlier. So I think we're going to see rapid improvement there.
Yeah.
Um, but I think for those teams on the extreme end, within 2 years, I got to be honest, I will be surprised if we see at least the leading edge, not bleeding edge, but the leading edge. I will be surprised if we see them writing very much code anymore.
Yeah,
Fascinating. I think I would love to hear from folks in the chat too, what you think about that. If that's like terrifying to you, I'm sure everyone has different perspectives and opinions. Feel free to chime in the chat. Go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to make just one comment is um, I think it's also important to start incrementally, and just say, okay, what's one small improvement we can ship that makes has an impact that makes data more usable, observable, or automated. It's just like one thing. We can. I think the future is definitely over the horizon, and so we should start kind of pulling that future back and saying, what's the one thing today that we can do that improves automation, usability, observability of the data that we are currently, working through our engineering pipeline today, and
Mhm.
then market that success.
Yeah,
Uh,
I,
you'll get excitement out of that as well.
I think that's so important to highlight. Again, drawing parallels between data and software side. And this is actually related to one of the questions that Shifra had posted earlier, which is, what are the biggest pitfalls you see of AI and data engineering? Is the same thing we've seen with software teams, which is, look, if you shoot too high and you're like, we're going to go then adopt all of these things all at once, as opposed to taking this incremental strategy, your odds of failure go up exponentially. And the odds of you trying another thing go down dramatically as well. And so posting small incremental wins and building that momentum inside of your organization, I think is really important, both for building team morale, but also building team skill set and familiarity with these tools. Because if you shoot too high and you miss, it's really easy for teams to, whether it's with automation or AI, be like, see, I told you it was a total fad. And then they're going to dismiss it and wake up in 6 months and realize these things are actually really amazing. And now they're behind the eight ball.
Yep.
And so I think it's really important to get those small incremental wins as you described.
Absolutely. We are coming up right to time. We did get to one question from the audience, Sean. Thank you for getting that in. I know other people probably have questions. We will send this recording later today. And if you have questions for either Sean or Bill that you didn't have posted in the chat that you would like answers on, definitely feel free to respond to that email and we'll try to get you an answer if we can. I wish we had more time for Q&A, but this is just such a great conversation. Who could cut it off? We really do want to thank everyone for being here today. Bill's slides are a part of their full market study on data engineering, and you can download that report on our website. The QR code there will take you to a link to download that. We will also send that link in a follow-up email. So if you don't have your phone handy, no worries. And you can check out additional resources at ascend.io. Thank you both, Bill and Sean, for being here and for this excellent conversation. And thank you, everyone, for attending. We really appreciate it and hope you have a great rest of your day. See you next time.
Thank you.